Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today. I'm Jamey. That's Heath. That's Chris. We got some news for you in regards to a couple of Tampa Bay Buccaneers players coming off their bye week. Bruce Arians says that Antonio Brown, who's been out with an ankle injury, still in a walking boot, so not expected to play as of now in Week 10 for the Bucs as they take on the, let me get the schedule here, as they take on
the Washington football team.
The Washington football team this week. Rob Gronkowski also expected to be out as he's still dealing with a back injury, rib pain. So plan on not having those Bucs players out there. No impact so far on Tom Brady. He's been obviously great without those guys. And clearly this is a boost for Mike Evans and Chris Godwin as well. Want to get to our overreaction Monday here as we take a look at some players who have been struggling in the last couple of weeks, maybe even in this Week 9 scoring period, and some concerns that you might have as fantasy managers and what to do with these guys moving forward. So let's start with the first guy here, and that's Jalen Hurts, who's had a pretty good fantasy season so far, but the last couple weeks have been a little struggle from his production standpoint. Had the easy win for the Eagles in Week 8 against the Lions. He only had 11 fantasy points in that matchup. Then he comes back against the Chargers and only scores 18 fantasy points after going 21 or more points in every game so far this season. So, Heath, for the Eagles, any concern taking on the Broncos this week? Not going to bench him.
You're not going to bench him. You do have concern because they are running the ball so much more. I talked about it earlier in the show. More than double the rush attempts the past 2 weeks as opposed to pass attempts. And it's not all Jalen Hurts in the running game like it was early in the year. Now, he's still doing enough. And I do think he's been unlucky the past 2 weeks that he hasn't received any of those rushing touchdowns and that they're not throwing the ball a little bit more in the red zone. I do expect his production to rebound, but maybe not quite to the level it was. He's a low-end top 12 quarterback this week.
And you're looking at a Broncos team that, despite losing Von Miller, played really well against Dak Prescott. So we'll see if that defense continues to show up and do some similar things like they did against Dak to hold him to minimal production as well. Let's go now to the next guy we're looking at here, Chris, and that's Ezekiel Elliott. It's now been 3 games where he hasn't found the end zone, 2 games with 12 PPR points or less, 51 yards rushing or less each of the last 2 weeks. He's been involved in the passing game, but we're not getting the type of production that we saw earlier in the season. Again, 2 games ago, no Dak Prescott. Last week, they just feels like they got punched in the mouth against the Broncos. In this week's matchup for them taking on the Falcons, is it all systems go still for Zeke?
Absolutely. I think the main explanation in this one was probably, one, Cowboys offense just didn't look right for whatever reason, whether it was because, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, and Dak Prescott were all limited this week with injuries. Maybe that was part of it, or maybe it was the fact that Ezekiel Elliott did leave this game with a knee contusion. He played a season-low 53% snap share and, missed a couple of series as a result of that, so he didn't have his normal role. I think he's almost certainly fine. I think the fact that, 5.1 yards per attempt, it's not like he played poorly yesterday. It was mostly just that the volume wasn't there and the offense wasn't good. If we have faith that the offense is going to be good and we think he's healthy, and I don't think we have any reason to think that this is going to be, an injury that lingers for too long, then, yeah, I have no real concerns about Ezekiel Elliott moving forward.
It would be nice to get Tyron Smith back as well. This Cowboys offense just not the same whenever they're missing one of their key offensive linemen, mostly Tyron Smith or Zach Martin. We saw that earlier this season when Martin was missing time. So hopefully Tyron Smith back against the Falcons with that ankle injury. All right, Heath, we talked about this a little bit earlier with the Packers not having Aaron Rodgers. We're hoping he's going to be back for the matchup against Seattle. Might have another prominent quarterback on the other side of the ball as well. But in terms of Aaron Jones, it's now been a little bit of a struggle for him also the last couple of weeks, and A.J. Dillon taking on more work. Do we have an Aaron Jones problem on our hands?
Not in the sense that you're even considering benching Aaron Jones, but I am a little bit concerned that we're not going to get top 5 running back or maybe even top 10 running back Aaron Jones. The big surprise has been how good A.J. Dillon has been in the passing game. That was not something we saw from him in college very much. He's done exceptional at it so far this season, and maybe part of that's because defenses don't expect it. But I do think as good as Dillon has been in both the running game and the passing game, we should expect maybe a little bit larger split for Dillon, which makes Jones more of a borderline number 1 running back, maybe a high-end number 2.
Jones in 2 of his last 3 games under 9 PPR points. So hopefully he finds the end zone. That's kind of been the key for him. But clearly the role in the passing game, no catches, was a big surprise in that game against the Chiefs. Cortland Sutton has got a problem on his hands, Chris, because as we've seen now, it's 2.5 games with Jerry Jeudy on the field, and Cortland Sutton has struggled. Tim Patrick's actually been the best Broncos receiver over the last couple of weeks with both guys healthy in terms of Jeudy and Sutton. But Sutton the last 2 weeks, 6 PPR points against Washington, 3 PPR points against Dallas. Is it time to consider benching Cortland Sutton as they take on the Eagles in week number 10?
I think this is the hardest kind of situation to address in fantasy as an analyst because it mostly just comes down to what the coaching staff wants to do. Cortland Sutton is still playing his pretty typical route and snap share. He's playing about 90% of the snaps over the last couple of weeks, running most of the routes. So it's not really that he's coming off the field or losing playing time. It's just that they haven't looked for him. And maybe that's just a function of the kind of routes he runs. He's a downfield receiver who is going to see, I would say, inconsistent targets typically, because, it requires him to be open, the defense to have allowed the deep threat to get open, and for the quarterback to see it and get the ball to him. So it could just be that he's back to being, I think, maybe better than Mike Williams in terms of the boom or bust, because I don't think his track record is quite as boom or busty as Mike Williams, but I think he's probably more like a low-end number 2, high-end number 3, who I don't know if you can trust every week to give you production, but I also don't know if I'd be super comfortable sitting him, because the chances of a boom game are there every week.
Yep, just hope to get back to it, but it's been just a little bit of a struggle for him target-wise, production-wise. Again, Jerry Jeudy coming back, not the best scenario for Cortland Sutton so far. And maybe not the best scenario for DJ Moore so far has been his quarterback. Sam Darnold has not helped DJ Moore the last several weeks. It's been basically 5 weeks of a struggle for him. He did have 13 PPR points against the Giants in Week 7, but otherwise it's been 10 PPR points or less. So, Heath, we know the story. Matt Rule saying that Sam Darnold has a shoulder problem might be the excuse that they're going to use to bench him for P.J. Walker. Does P.J. Walker come in and save DJ Moore, or do we have a DJ Moore problem rest of season?
We have a DJ Moore problem in terms of him breaking out and being what we were hoping going to be, and have kind of had that problem now for a couple of years. He's just not quite reached those heights. But if we're comparing him to Mike Williams and Cortland Sutton, I have more confidence in DJ Moore rest of the season than those two. I'd probably rank it Moore and then Sutton and then Williams. I'll still treat Moore like a number 2 wide receiver. There are situations you might have where you have 3 guys that you'd rather start than him, but for the most part, I'm viewing him as a must-start wide receiver.
And he hasn't had less than 7 targets each game this year. And if you just want to hope for something, whether it's Walker or Darnold, in the first 3 games of the season, when we had Christian McCaffrey on the field, and we know McCaffrey just came back after the extended absence with the hamstring injury, those were DJ Moore's best stretch of games. He did have a good game against Dallas in Week 4 without McCaffrey also, but maybe just having the threat of another player that's doing something, because we know it's not Robbie Anderson. Terrace Marshall's not lived up to the expectations so far, and so maybe just having somebody else to help Moore will help him moving forward. But again, the quarterback play's got to be better, whether that's P.J. Walker or Sam Darnold.